As one examines the history of the Roman Catholic Church, the frequency of abominable practices and events seen leaves little doubt that she is not the fulfillment of God's salvation program on the earth. The level of wickedness produced by this false system negates such an idea. Once the evidence is assessed, it becomes obvious that she belongs to the kingdom of darkness. The following are some of the most evil atrocities committed by the Roman religion in history. Pope Urban VI reigned from AD 1378 to 1389. During his reign, an anti-pope rose up, stating he was the real pope, that is Clement VII. Because Joanna, Queen of Nepal, sided with Clement VII, Pope Urban VI had her deposed and replaced by her cousin, Charles of Durazzo. However, Charles of Durazzo and Pope Urban VI later had a falling out, resulting in Charles, as well as some cardinals, plotting against him. As a result, Pope Urban VI had 6 of these cardinals brutally tortured and then murdered. In fact, it is stated that while these cardinals were being tortured, Pope Urban VI complained that their screams were not loud enough for his satisfaction. Benedict IX reigned as pope twice in the 11th century. During his second reign, he actually sold his papal office to his godfather, Giovanni Gratiano, archpriest of the Venerable Church of St. John, who then became Pope Gregory VI. The papacy was sold to him for 1,500 pounds of gold. Alexander VI reigned as pope from AD 1492 to 1503. Historians note that he amassed ridiculous amounts of wealth. He fathered 7 children with different women, 2 of which were after he became pope. Historian Williston Walker notes that he was, quote, a man of unbridled immorality. His great concern was to advance his bastard children, especially his daughter, Lucrezia Borgia, by advantageous marriages, and his unscrupulous and murderous son, Cesare Borgia, by aiding him to carve a principality out of the Papal States. Philip Schaff explains an unthinkable event near the end of Alexander VI's life, quote, 2 years before Alexander VI's death, October 31st, 1501, an orgy took place in the Vatican by Caesar's appointment, whose obscenity the worst of the imperial revels could hardly have surpassed. 50 courtesans spent the night dancing with the servants and others present, first with their clothes on and then nude, the Pope and Lucretia looking on. The women, still naked and going on their hands and feet, picked up chestnuts thrown on the ground and then received prizes of cloaks, caps, and other articles. E.R. Chamberlain likewise confirms, quote, the Vatican has been the scene of scandalous enough behavior. Now the court became actively criminal, curiously, deliberately perverted. 50 Roman harlots coupled with 50 palace servants for prizes presented by Alexander, unquote. It's interesting to note that this is the Pope who canonized, that is, made saint, one of Rome's favorite saints, Anselm of Canterbury. The next atrocity concerns forgeries Rome created in order to deceive people to believe in papal primacy and Roman supremacy. The first is called the Donation of Constantine. This document was forged in the 8th to 9th century by Rome. In it, the Emperor Constantine, who reigned during the papal reign of Pope Sylvester I, AD 314 to 345, is represented as conferring on Pope Sylvester I and Rome certain prerogatives and honors which 8th to 5th century Roman Catholicism would point to as evidence for the historicity of her papal doctrine and policy. In it, Emperor Constantine gives to Pope Sylvester I primacy over the church patriarchs of the world and dominion over Rome and the Western states. The document was proven to be false in the 15th century. It was not a letter from Emperor Constantine, it was created by Rome. Another similar example is known as the Pseudo-Isidorian Decretals, which were produced in the 9th century by Catholic scholars. They were a set of documents forged in the name of the late Isidore of Seville, the 6th and 7th century Archbishop of Seville. These documents, according to Schaff, quote, gave legal expression to the popular opinion of the papacy, raised and strengthened its power more than any other agency. In fact, on the same page, Schaff explains that the papal teaching within these forged decretals, quote, forms to a large extent the basis of the canon law of the Church of Rome, unquote. In other words, Rome's canon law, which is still used today, is based on these papal forgeries. John XII reigned as Pope from AD 955 to 964. He was one of the most immoral popes of history and engaged in things one would expect a Satanist to engage in. Historian Philip Schaff notes, John XII disgraced the tiara for 8 years. He was one of the most immoral and wicked popes, ranking with Benedict IX, John XXIII, and Alexander VI. He was charged by a Roman synod, no one contradicting, with almost every crime of which depraved human nature is capable, and deposed as a monster of iniquity. Schaff lists the following charges of the synod against John XII. Appearing constantly with an armed sword, lance, helmet, and breastplate, that he neglected matins and vespers, that he had made a boy of 10 years a bishop, and ordained a bishop or deacon in a stable, that he had mutilated a priest, that he had set houses on fire like Nero, that he had committed homicide and adultery, had violated virgins and widows high and low, lived with his father's mistress, converted the pontifical palace into a brothel, drank to the health of the devil, and invoked at the gambling table the help of Jupiter and Venus and other heathen demons. Now, the reformers protested the veneration of relics which Catholics fervently sought out in the medieval era. It was affirmed that veneration of these fake relics would shorten a person's time in purgatory. Explaining some of these is Eleanor Herman, quote, "The body parts of the saints were called first-class relics. Some Italian churches boasted magnificent first-class items, drops of Virgin Mary's breast milk, the foreskin of Jesus' penis, and his umbilical cord. Other churches offered second-class relics, articles that had been intimately connected with the holy person during his or her life. One Roman church exposed Jesus' cradle from the manger, and another the marble pedestal on which Pontius Pilate had had him flogged. This outraged regenerated Bible believers such as Luther and Calvin. In his work, The Theology of John Calvin, Charles Party highlights some of Calvin's recollections of these absurd relics, quote, "In a rare reference to his childhood, Calvin expresses the outrage of a small boy, observing the poor ignorant women of his parish, unable to distinguish between the figures of saints, murderers, and demons, adoring all alike with garlands. As an adult, Calvin notes that among the amazing things an account of relics would reveal is that every apostle had more than 4 bodies, and every saint 2 or 3. Equally amazing, anatomically, is the display of the foreskin of Jesus at 3 churches, one in Chirac, one in Rome, and a third in Hildesheim. Again, although only one man carried the cross, if all the pieces were assembled in the same place, one could build a ship. Among the credulous, goat droppings are taken for the beads of the Virgin Mary." Calvin recognizes that since the body of the Virgin Mary is not on earth, no bones can be produced, but the compensation is her breast milk. Had the breasts of the Most Holy Virgin yielded a more copious supply than is given by a cow, or had she continued to nurse during her whole lifetime, she scarcely could have furnished the quantity which is exhibited, unquote. The pornocracy is a name given to a period of 68 years in the 10th century, which spanned the reign of 15 popes. It started with Sergius III, who reigned from AD 904 to 911, and lasted to John XIII's reign from 965 to 972. It was a period where a family of nobility called the Theophylact family, most notably the women of the family Theodora and her daughter Marozia, had firm control over the popes and led the papacy into much immorality, wickedness, and corruption. J.N.D. Kelly and M.J. Walsh note, the papacy itself was effectively controlled by this powerful, unscrupulous family. Pope Sergius III was intimate with and had a child with Theodora's 15-year-old daughter, Marozia. Their child would then be installed as pope by the Theophylact family when he grew up. He would be named Pope John XI. The way Pope Sergius III became pope was that he marched to Rome with an armed force, deposed anti-pope Christopher, and had him thrown into the Gaul, after which he was executed. Pope John X, AD 914 to 928, was at first on good terms with the Theophylact family, which was at this time still controlling the papacy. However, because of certain political actions, Marozia, daughter of Theophylact, organized a revolt against him. They had his brother murdered, and he himself ended up being deposed of his papal office and suffocated to death. This family freely installed popes such as Leo VI, Stephen VII, and others. Marozia married numerous times during the siege of the papacy. Commenting on this horrible time, Philip Schaff notes, The papacy itself lost all independence and dignity, and became the prey of avarice, violence, and intrigue, a veritable synagogue of Satan. It was dragged through the quagmire of the darkest crimes, and would have perished in utter disgrace had not Providence saved it for better times. Pope followed pope in rapid succession, and most of them ended their career in deposition, prison, and murder. These Roman Amazons, Theodora and Marozia, combined with the fatal charms of personal beauty and wealth, a rare capacity for intrigue, and a burning lust for power and pleasure, they turned the Church of St. Peter into a den of robbers, and the residence of his successors into harem. And they gloried in their shame. Hence this infamous period is called the Papal Pornocracy, or Heterocracy. Pope Stephen VI reigned as pope from AD 896 to 897. He was consecrated as Bishop of Anagni by previous Pope Formosus, who reigned from AD 891 to 896. However, Stephen VI turned his back on Formosus. After Formosus died, Stephen VI had his 8-month-old corpse exhumed, dressed in full papal vestments, and put on a throne for a mock trial on charges of perjury, coveting the papacy and violating the canons prohibiting the translation of bishops. A deacon stood beside Formosus's dead body and answered for him at the mock trial. Formosus was declared to be guilty, his fingers cut off, and his body tossed into the Tiber River. This is truly satanic. Stephen VI's actions did not go unpunished. A few months later, the outraged Catholic supporters of Formosus, as Kelly and Walsh note, quote, deposed Stephen, stripped him of his papal insignia, and threw him into the Gaul, where he was shortly afterwards strangled, unquote. Next is the historical abomination of indulgences. An indulgence is the remission of temporal punishments of sin here and in purgatory. It was proclaimed by medieval Rome that these indulgences could shorten people's time in the non-existent place called purgatory. Pope Urban II, who reigned from AD 1088 to 1099, offered indulgences to the Crusaders who died battling Muslims, whereby all their temporal punishments for sin were said to be remitted. Not only is the idea of indulgences an abomination, but the fact that Roman Catholicism sold indulgences in the Middle Ages is unthinkably satanic. On April 18, 1506, Pope Julius II put out a bull promising indulgence to those who paid money to him. He would use these funds to construct St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Rome commissioned certain preachers like Tetzel to go around scaring Catholics into giving their money so that they could get loved ones out of purgatory faster. The logical abuse which came about is that people would sin willfully, thinking it was okay since they would just pay money to get the temporal punishments for sin remitted. This despicable practice was fervently opposed by the reformer Martin Luther.